Hello everyone, this is John Bernert, and welcome to the Bible chapter by chapter. Today we're going to look at Mark chapter 2, beginning at verse 23, and going into the first part of Mark chapter 3 as well. So let's read this passage, and then we will talk it over. Starting at verse 23. Now it happened that he, that's Jesus, went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as he went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" But he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry? He and those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat for anyone except the priests, and also gave some to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath." So Jesus is saying here that he's the one that gets to define the Sabbath, not the Pharisees. The Pharisees had, over the years, over the centuries, defined the Sabbath so strictly that it became a burden. It wasn't a joy. It didn't have anything to do with entering into the rest of God. It was not so much about what God could do or what God had done, but it was about what man, you and I, shouldn't do, couldn't do, wouldn't be able to do. The focus had left God and was concentrated on man, what man could do, what man should do, what man couldn't do, what man shouldn't do. And so it actually lost all meaning. The original meaning of depending on God, entering into God's rest, depending on his provision, was lost. And it was about doing this, not doing that. It became about legalism and not about God. And Jesus here is changing the focus. He's attempting to change the focus here and also in the first part of Mark chapter 3. He's changing the focus back on God. He says, I'm the one that gets to decide what the Sabbath is about, not you. You've taken it and corrupted it. The Sabbath was not to be a burden to man, but it was to be a time of refreshing for man. But man had turned it into legalism and rights and wrongs and do this and don't do that, and instead had turned it into something that was burdensome. If you remember Matthew chapter 11, starting around verse 28, Jesus there is talking about rest as well, calling those that were burdened, heavy laden, to come to him, to take up his yoke, and to find rest in him. And this is what the Pharisees are missing here. They see the disciples coming and being hungry. According to the Pharisees, the disciples should have stayed hungry and not enjoyed the blessings and the fruit that God had provided for them. Even the stranger and the homeless and the poor could go into the field, any farmer's field, and pluck that which was needed for the day so that they might have some food. This was clearly established in the Old Testament and is portrayed most vividly in the book of Ruth. But this the Pharisees had lost sight of, that God provides. It's not man that provides for himself, not food, not righteousness, not right standing before God, but it's God that provides all of that. And so here the disciples aren't actually breaking the law. Even David, when he went and he took the bread that he wasn't supposed to eat and ate it, he actually did break the law. But even he was not condemned, nor those who were with him, because the Sabbath is life-sustaining, not life-ending. And the law of God is life-sustaining, not life-ending. And so here the Pharisees are so concerned about form, ritual, actions, but they don't look at the heart. They miss that point completely. So here it is, they condemn people who are innocent. And Matthew's version of this particular incident actually shows that his disciples were innocent, and it was the Pharisees who had missed the point utterly and completely. So from the end of Mark chapter 2, we now go into the beginning of Mark chapter 3. And here we move from the outside, from the field, and we move into the synagogue. And we're presented with the same situation again. Starting in verse 1 of Matthew 3, and he, again Jesus, entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a withered hand. So they watched him closely, that is the Pharisees, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Step forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they kept silent, and when he had looked around them with anger, that is, fleeting anger, being grieved by the hardness of their heart, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and the hand was restored as whole as the other. Again, here the message is the same, that of giving life and not giving death, of not being legalistic, but enjoying the presence and the blessings of God. Matthew 12, 9-13, and Luke 6, 6-10 also speak about this particular incident. And again, it's mentioned in one of them. Jesus says, well, what if one of you had a sheep and it fell into a ditch, or an animal? Wouldn't you set it free? Wouldn't you get it out? Wouldn't you release your beast of burden and allow it to enjoy the blessings of God without having to work? And these are the points that Jesus is trying to bring across, because they'd missed the point. To them, it was all about legalism, all about obeying laws, and it wasn't about mercy. It wasn't about life. It wasn't about enjoying rest. It wasn't about enjoying the presence of God. To them, it was all about justifying themselves in the face of God. And Jesus is saying here, it's not about justifying yourself. It's about accepting that which God has provided. And the greatest provision of all is that of salvation and of righteousness that he gives to us who are not deserving of it. And until they could understand that, they really couldn't go forward to know who God was and to have a relationship, an intimate relationship, a conversational relationship where they could actually speak to God and talk to him as a friend instead of a master who was cruel and overbearing. That's how they saw God. They saw him as cruel, overbearing, miserly. But Jesus has come to show us that he is a God of love, a God of provision, a God who cares, a God who sacrifices himself for his people. And he calls us, just as he called them at the time, to repentance, to turn around, to turn back to him, not to follow after legalism, not to follow after our wisdom, our thinking, our ways, but to turn around, follow him, and enter into his rest. Thanks for watching, and please press the subscribe button, and more than that, share this with someone who doesn't know the love and the care and the provision of God. Until we meet again, rejoice in the Lord always, and in the power of his might.